Okay, folks, so we have the lunar eclipse in Scorpio coming up in 3 or 4 days' time, and there are a few videos I want to do before then because they all relate to this particular eclipse cycle that we're in. As a reminder, we had the solar eclipse in Aries, for which I did a video on April the 19th. 2 weeks after that, on May the 5th, we're going to have a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that solar eclipse in this video. I've done a video. I'm going to put a link to that video at the end of this one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the lunar eclipse. That's going to be a separate video coming up. But first, let me just talk about this particular Mercury retrograde cycle, which becomes important and relevant insofar as these eclipses that are taking place, both the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse, are happening. The solar eclipse happened while Mercury was stationary. 2 days after the solar eclipse happened, the next day the sun moved into Taurus, and then we had Mercury retrograde in Taurus on consecutive days. So technically Mercury was still direct, but for all intents and purposes it was stationary, getting ready to go retrograde. During this particular eclipse coming up, Mercury is retrograde. And apart from the possibility that it gives these eclipses for a lot of us an introspective quality, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, because eclipses really are the wild cards in the year, and different people are going to experience the eclipses in different ways. So let me bring the video back to Mercury retrograde, and this particular Mercury retrograde that I want to talk about. The shadow period, the degrees. So imagine that Mercury is going direct, and then from where we stand on planet Earth, it looks like it's going backwards, and it's not really going backwards. Both the Earth and Mercury are moving around the sun, but it just so happens it's like two buses moving together, and when they turn, or in the orbit, it's that part of the orbit where Mercury looks like where the Earth is traveling fast, so Mercury looks like it's going backwards from where how you've ever done that with two buses when they're going side by side, and then all of a sudden the bus is actually moving forward, but from where you sit in this bus, it looks like this bus is going backwards. It's not, but that's what it looks like. And Mercury retrograde is that kind of optical illusion, essentially. But from where we sit, Mercury in the sky looks like it's going backwards. Well, the forward, backward, and forward movement. The first forward is referred to as a shadow period. Then Mercury goes retrograde, and then it goes through the shadow again and clears it. So the degrees that Mercury travels 3 times during a retrograde, first direct, then retrograde, then direct, those degrees are what when Mercury first enters those degrees, or the degree which is as far back as Mercury is going to go retrograde, that's when we start the shadow period. And the shadow period for Mercury was April the 7th to 21st. So between April 7th to 21st of this year, Mercury went over the same degrees that it is now in retrograde motion going back. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that it would not surprise me at all if you find yourself thinking about, processing, retrospecting about events and challenges that occurred during that time, April 7th to 21st. And it's a little bit like, well, it's not a little bit like, it's like the Jeep Mercury moved forward, then it went into reverse and said, well, I need to go over this one more time, and then it's going to go direct on May the 14th and continue to move forward till May the 31st. After May the 31st, it moves into a different, it finally goes past the degrees that it has traveled 3 times. And there's one more date I feel compelled to tell you right now. Hold on. Just give me 1 second. Bear with me. It just came to me, and it seems very relevant and important. Mercury conjuncts Uranus on, excuse me a second, Mercury on June the 4th. So May the 31st, it clears that shadow period. On June the 4th, it conjuncts Uranus. And I find that June the 4th date important, because what happened was Mercury was moving forward and getting ready to conjunct Uranus when it pulled back, going to go direct on May the 14th, May 31st it clears, and finally it meets up with Uranus on that date. The other two dates I really want to mention to you um, along with this is that Venus conjuncted Uranus on March the 30th in Taurus, of course, and the Sun conjuncts Uranus on May the 9th. So Venus on March the 30th, the Sun on May the 9th, and then Mercury on June the 4th. Okay? There's some sort of a conversation between what was set up with these conjunctions with Uranus and this Mercury retrograde cycle. Another thing for you to think about as you look back, if you were tracking some sort of an opportunity or a relationship opportunity, or and that Venus conjunct Uranus state becomes really interesting because on March the 30th, Mars trines Saturn too. So there was some sort of boundary being set around that time as you headed to that as well. I don't want to confuse you. Around March the 30th, it's possible that a liberating, forward-moving, aligning opportunity, relationship opportunity, financial opportunity, blessing may have planted a seed, whether it was an actual event or thematic, and then by the time we get to May the 9th and the Sun conjuncts Uranus after this full moon lunar eclipse, could bring some illumination or some sort of conscious, or with the Sun, the word to use is conscious, but because it's our consciousness, but I prefer to use the word subconsciousness because most of us are not connected to our consciousness the way we need to be on a day-to-day basis. So whatever happens with the Sun feels like it's happening on a much more subconscious level, but it's actually happening on the level of our consciousness. The Sun conjuncts, so there's some sort of a dialogue between the Sun and Uranus that happens on May the 9th, but most importantly, Mercury, the planet of communication, finally conjuncts Uranus on June the 4th. So those are dates to watch out for. And this retrograde period, somehow this inability of Mercury being held back to conjunct Uranus and being pulled retrograde seems relevant and important. Part of the reason why it might seem relevant and important is that the shadow period dates that I mentioned between April 7th to 21st and what was occurring during that period may require processing. There may be lessons that need to be learned. There may be things that were murky during that time. And here, I really need you to hear me carefully now on what I'm going to say here. Things that may have been murky during that time may start to become clearer, or your perspective on them may start to become clearer and more assimilated. Even if the facts are not clear, you might be in the process of reaching some sort of conclusion around them during this Mercury retrograde period that allows you to process what happened during that time, and nothing happens in isolation. So the fact that April 7th to 21st is the shadow period doesn't mean that the things that happened there were not connected to what happened just before that or before that. So I'll let you think that through. But that's where Mercury is traveling, 3 times essentially between April 7th to 21st. And so everything that is expressed, I just saw this quote I'm paraphrasing something I saw on some sort of spiritual website, and it talked about how, words and language and the reality we create through language all happens at the level of the mind. Fine. And I thought that was so perfect because it describes Mercury. So Mercury is our mind, is our language, is our communication. It's transactions and it's social media and it's technology and it's commuting and it's cars and vehicles and travel and messaging. But at the heart of it, and learning and skill acquisition and communicating within one's environment, and the word on the street and gossip and bulletin boards and information. But all of that information, data, communication is constructed through language. And so with Mercury, the mind and our sense of language and our understanding of facts around us and trying to make clear sense of them and trying to make sense of what is going on around us is very much part of Mercury's job for us, our mind's job of making sense of what is going on around us, whether it is in terms of relationships or finances or wherever it is that we find ourselves. And when it comes to Mercury retrograde, one of the things to watch out for, especially processing things that happen during the shadow period, is that it could be that there are things that are murky and that are not clear, and that our mind and our language is not able to articulate. Partly because whatever's going on, either people are not being clear about, or there's a certain amount of obfuscation, or, you know, when Mercury goes retrograde, the mind's extrovert and overt ability through language and through communication to make sense of facts and information and data and behaviors and those things we perceive, that process becomes much more internal. And it's almost, you could argue, as if the mind switches off. So things bubble up. And during this retrograde period, and particularly I'm looking at yesterday, and I'll explain why in a second. So I'm looking at the last 48 to 72 hours and the next 24 hours or so around May the 1st. So a few days, a couple of days before May the 1st, a couple of days after May the 1st. I want you, the reason why I'm doing this video now is that I want you to pay attention to and think about what has been bubbling up. And it may well be that it happens on the level of intuition, but that you're still not able to make sense of facts, and there are things that are still veiled and unclear. But it could be that this download, what happened on May the 1st is essentially the retrograde Mercury met up with the sun. When a planet meets up with the sun, first and foremost, the planet itself goes combust. So it loses, in ancient terms or traditional terms, its power. Mercury is already retrograde, so we're not expecting it to have much overt power anyway. We know that Mercury retrograde is rife with transactional and travel and meeting and technology snafus and craziness, right? I don't feel like I need to. So all that mundane craziness that we associate with Mercury retrograde still applies. And it especially applies at its strongest when Mercury is going retrograde, April the 21st or thereabouts, and when it's going to go direct, May the 14th. Now, around the Mercury cazimi with the sun, or conjunction with the sun on May the 1st, Mercury can also exhibit a peak of Mercury retrograde behavior. But the more important thing is the conversation occurring between Mercury and the sun. The sun stands for our consciousness. I just said this before in this video. We experience it almost on a subconscious level because we're not that in touch with our consciousness. We are much more in touch with our Mercury self and our moon self, and to some extent our Venus self and Mars self, the personal planets. We are much more in touch with our mental life and our emotional life, and to some extent our intuitive life, and in the realm of being receptive and being active when it comes to Venus and Mars, whether it is in relationships, romance, financial transactions, or the way we take action and take rest and receive gifts from the universe and go out and create our own reality. Okay. The sun, which really operates on a soul level, the conjunctions with the sun are important, and that's why when the sun is going to conjunct Uranus on May the 9th, I said this as well, there's a communication that occurs around that time between the planet in question. It's like, some astrologers describe it as the planet that's conjuncting the sun is burning off old karma, because the sun is this kind of blazing hot star cauldron, and then as it moves forward, it is somehow burned clean of a certain amount of, I think that it's more like a download that happens between the planet and our consciousness. And it will not surprise me if during this Mercury retrograde period and during this conjunction with the sun, you go through a process that is a kind of like a cleansing and a processing of things that are specific to that April 7th to 21st period. Now, this will continue because Mercury is going to go retrograde May the 14th, and it's going to go all the way back to where it was on April the 7th. Then it's going to go direct, and on May the 31st, it's going to go all the way up to where it was on April 21st. It's going to clear the shadow period, and on June the 4th, it will finally be able to conjunct Uranus. So the processing continues. After Mercury goes direct and is still in the shadow period, I expect further developments. Perhaps finally some clarity or some conversation or some communication about how things are moving forward or not. But one of the things that I really want to communicate to you about this Mercury retrograde cycle is this idea of processing things And when Mercury is retrograde, the processing is not conversations with others and trying to get facts from others and trying to force information from others, or not fighting with others, not arguing, not demanding, not seeking, as much as it is a backpedal, a reverse, a quieting down, so that the processing, the communication, the language is much more internal. It's almost as if Mercury's data collecting and information process has either retired or has retreated into ourselves, so that we're doing the churning and the processing. We're doing the assimilating. We're doing the assimilating and trying to make sense of what happened. And when Mercury conjuncts the Sun during this retrograde process, as it did yesterday, starting a Mercury cycle in Taurus, there's a communication cycle that started in Taurus. Where does Taurus sit in your chart? What house does it occupy? What does that house stand for? That is going to now continue until, my darlings, September the 6th. So between May the 1st and September the 6th, between May the 1st and May the 14th, while Mercury is retrograde, is a great time to make plans around what related to the sign of Taurus you're going to be communicating about and what you're going to be transacting about. May the 14th to July the 1st, time to act and put that into action. July the 1st to August the 23rd, time to reap the results, but also make adjustments. August 23rd to September 26th, finishing up this Mercury retrograde cycle in Taurus. Just as April the 21st to May the 1st, hear me, hear me. April the 21st to May the 1st, you were closing out the last Mercury cycle that started in January in the sign of Capricorn. So if you know where Capricorn sits in your chart, it could very well be that April the 7th to April the 21st to May the 1st, what you were making sense of and what you were closing out for yourself was related to the sign of Capricorn. And I'm going to say this one more time. This is going to go back a few videos at the beginning of the year. Our new year started with opportunities that came our way in November, but particularly December. You may have been finally be able to avail of those opportunities starting the middle of February, and in some ways that first phase of 2023 ended yesterday and is still in the process of working its way out. So this Mercury retrograde conjunction with the Sun yesterday, indeed, if you find yourself, you are in the next 14 days going to finish up processing this April the 7th to 21st timeline, and are going to be able to finally shift to thinking about what it is that you want to create and what your goals are going to be in the Taurus part of your chart. Remember, not only is there a Mercury cycle that takes us to September the 6th, at the end of October, there is a lunar eclipse in Taurus. So the Taurus part of our chart starts to take more priority. Jupiter enters Taurus in a few weeks. So that starts to take more priority. One more thing about Mercury retrograde I want to mention, which is that projects associated with Mercury retrograde, these are projects that when other Mercury retrogrades happen, you may have more information. I touched on this in the last solar eclipse video, so I'll just say this about it one more time. Especially when Mercury goes retrograde, April the 21st, and goes direct May the 14th, you may get information, further information here. There may be events or developments related to projects that started or occurred while Mercury was retrograde before. It happens. I don't know why. Related to this is the idea that you may be moving forward in a certain direction, point number 3, but Mercury retrograde may give you and deliver important information that was in your blind spot that it is important for you to know before you move forward. So if you thought things were headed in a certain direction through April the 21st, important between April 21st and May the 14th to hit the pause button, and however uncomfortable the data or the information might be, understand its importance so that you can adjust after May the 14th. And sometimes this kind of information is very disappointing. You didn't know XYZ was going on. You didn't know something else. You didn't know someone was thinking this. You didn't know things emerge and they come up. The two most important things, though, for me are processing the April 7th to 21st portion, closing out the last Mercury cycle in Capricorn, which over the next few days, it wouldn't surprise me if you reach certain conclusions. Even if you don't have the facts, you might decide where you're going to wrap a bow around certain things and put them on the shelf so you can start your Mercury cycle now in the sign of Taurus. And remember that not unusual for past projects, past people to all of a sudden show up in your life when Mercury goes retrograde and direct and during the retrograde period. People, projects, and information coming up that was in your blind spot that has to be assimilated, however uncomfortable, and projects that have a history of being done or being completed or even started. Projects that have major developments during Mercury retrograde periods, you might see developments around those as well. Okay? That's where I'm going to leave this because that's all I want you to think about for now. More to come on the videos as we head towards this eclipse. Thank you. If you found this useful, feel free to share it, comment on it, like it. Click the subscribe to my YouTube channel, and next to the subscribe button is a bell icon. If you click on that, on top there's a wiggly bell. Press on that and you'll be notified whenever I do new videos. All right, enough for now. Thank you.